Network of youth leaders by the name of Active Change Drivers is mobilizing young people to register to vote in the 2024 elections. Despite South Africa having a youth population of over 60%, the voter participation has in the past been quite low. We're now joined by Zamayirha Peter, Communications Manager at Active Change Drivers. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So we tried to get hold of the IEC so they can join the conversation, but when we asked them about this number that is being bandied about of 14 million unregistered young people, they were like, where did you get that from? So to your knowledge, where do we sit where that is concerned?
Good afternoon, Dudu. Thank you so much for having us as a network on this afternoon. I think it is quite correct and accurate to say that we are sitting at, not more than 14 million young people who have not yet registered to vote. And I think it's important to highlight right from the onset the fact that a majority of young people in this country really do not have an emotional relationship with the political process, particularly the act of voting, and when compared to the elderly generation, and this is the generation pre-1994. When we are having conversations publicly with young people, they regard the idea of voting as being an event of every 5 years, but not a consequence of everyday life. It's also important to highlight the fact that young people in this country, our context of democracy and Mandela is a post-1994 context. So even the barometer that we use to measure the effectiveness of voting is based on the kind of leadership we as custodians of post-1994 South Africa are experiencing. And what we are doing as young people is we are looking at the act of voting versus the effectiveness and the result that has come from a democratically elected government. So we're asking questions such as, what have been the fruits of the 1994 government? How has this impacted my life personally as you call on me in my personal capacity to go and vote?
Because on the website of the IEC, when you go under voters roll, it's only about voter registration statistics of those who are actually registered to vote. But when you speak of what young people are grappling with post-1994, how do they characterize what they are going through?
Young people are disengaged from the political process. There's not a full commitment to voting as being a democratic right and responsibility that is bestowed upon all, members of this country, citizens, active citizens in this country. What we find at times is that, voting is seen as a reinforcement of the status quo. There's a bit of distrust in the electoral and political process because several young people look at, the government and they look at government structures, and due to the corruption that is very prevalent, the majority of youth in this country don't feel partial to democracy. When the wealth and the resources of this country lie with the 10%, young people don't feel that there's a platform or room for them that has been provided. And so when we call on them every 5 years to participate, in political processes, particularly through voting, they feel like they're just being used as a ticket to empower the ones who are part of the political elite, the 10%, and they don't feel that they are beneficiaries in any way of this democratic South Africa that we are told to rally behind and to participate in.
They do not feel like beneficiaries of this democratic South Africa. And so when you take a look at the narrative that is being bandied about, a lot of people will say, well, 2024 is going to be South Africa's 1994 moment. That is up for discussion and open to debate. But what does it mean when you speak of these issues where young people do not feel like they're part of the wealth and resources of this country? Could we very well see what we saw during the local government elections in 2021, where young people very well stayed away?
Absolutely. I think it's very much possible that young people will stay away, particularly with how, the road to 2024 has been, framed. At the moment, what we see leading the conversation and galvanizing young people to go vote are political parties that don't even have a very large youth democratic representation in the individuals that, they call to serve their respective political parties. And I think it's important to highlight that while, young people are grateful for the efforts of those that came before us, which they realized in their youth, young people are on the receiving end of leadership of people who are creating policies and establishing laws for a time that they will not live to see. And so what we see happening with young people is they are asking, what have you done now with the responsibility of office that has positively impacted my life. I don't think it's going to be easy to get young people to go vote if we are not going into their direct communities and we are not meeting them where they are. And we are not including in our policies meaningful, references of how young people are going to be empowered. And there aren't really, relatable references of members of parliament currently that are being deployed by political parties that, are channeling the voices and the needs of young people. We don't think that, the 2024 general election will result in anything different that we have not seen playing out in the last 5 years. We believe that, if, political parties really wanted to rally young people to go out and vote, it would have been a habit and a culture that was, inoculated into political life before, the 2024 election. But, it would have been evident and prevalent in how, political parties and, general society, creates platforms and, opportunities for young people, and not just to use the 2024 election as a ticket to convince young people to participate in democracy.
Zamayirha izotiwani ke into, because last week during the EFF celebrations, he noted, Julius Malema, that you see the sea of people that are here, it is on a weekday, and that is not because they decided they wanted to come here for fun. It's because it speaks to the lack of employment, more so for young people. And so when you get told that vote because it's going to change your life, but here you have what you've outlined in terms of what young people are saying, and this is the youngest continent in terms of youth population, and South Africa is no exception to the rule. Do we run the risk again of this nasty cycle repeating itself, where you have a number of young people who are left behind?
We certainly do. And I think it's also important to highlight the fact that there needs to be a collaborative effort, and not just from political parties, but, CSOs need to come on board. The IEC needs to come on board. The fourth estate needs to come on board. We need to see voter education happening at basic education. Learners who are in grade 11 and grade 12 who are likely to be turning 18 and eligible to register to vote need to see, the importance and the culture and political literacy being incorporated into their curriculum, because there are several barriers that are also just restricting young people from being able to participate in registering to vote or even voting. So it's important that we have a conversation with all these sectors to encourage them to ensure that there's a culture within the various institutions that encourages young people to participate in democracy. Because at the end of the day, it is the laws and the policies that are passed in Parliament that affect not only politicians and, young people, but they affect the very quality of life. And what we are communicating as a network is that if you are unhappy with the status quo, you have to understand that your vote is the direct influence to change in the status quo. Protest action and petitions, that we often find that young people are involved in are only a response to a democratic decision that young people have been given an opportunity to partake in. But we must address, and reduce barriers to registration. Things like, electoral reforms that reduce the complexity of voting processes will help encourage young people to register to vote. We need to look at having things like, same-day registrations, which follows people to register when they come to cast the ballot, even if they've missed the voter registration deadline. There needs to be some kind of flexibility and consideration to digitize the voting system, and even the adverts and the campaigns that are happening need to be in a form that is acceptable and appealing to young people. We must have podcasts that speak to voting. We must have spaces that speak to voting. We need to have road shows that go into the communities where young people are, and they need to be given an opportunity to contribute quite literally to the kind of democracy and the kind of South Africa that they wish and they envision to be a part of, and not to be told to go and register to vote, and not to be told to, choose a specific political party, but sit with young people and inquire what is causing the voter apathy. Besides the idea of being empowered economically with a job, what else are young people wanting to see become of this country and this democracy? How can we, address issues such as load shedding?
Thank you so much, Sisi. Unfortunately, that's all we can afford in terms of time, but thank you very much for your contribution.